After my son passed away, his wife inherited the mansion and $40 million. Then she looked at me coldly and said, "You don't belong here anymore. Go die in the streets." Days later, the lawyer chuckled and asked, "Did you really listen to the will?" What followed made my daughter-in-law collapse on the spot. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. If I blow it today, I could lose my grandson Caleb to winter and to a man who calls cruelty discipline. The polished quartzite casket gleamed under a sky the color of an old bruise. It threatened rain, the kind that waits until you take your hat off and then remembers what clouds are for. Folks wore black like crows scattered across the manicured green lawn of the mausoleum. I held Julian's third-grade photo, the one with the missing front teeth and the unapologetic gap-toothed grin, the way a man holds a complex algorithm when his mind needs focus. The rabbi was mid-sentence, speaking of lights and eternal wisdom, when Serafina Vale drifted toward me in stilettos that clicked against the marble tiles like a metronome for bad manners. "Elias," she said, her voice soft, but loud enough for the nearest investment banker and the mayor's wife to catch it. "I hope you're not thinking you'll be staying in my house after this." Rage, cold and pure as liquid nitrogen, hit me, a sensation I had not felt since the first hostile takeover of my career. The photograph of Julian flexed in my palm. "It's my son's home," I said quietly, the word son pronounced with a weight that grief had taught me. "Because this grief doesn't have the lungs for shouting." "Was," she answered, correcting me with an icy finality that betrayed her practiced sincerity. So Julian made sure his loving wife was provided for. I felt Marcus, my former head of security, step up beside me, his tailored suit hiding the bulk of a man who understood leverage better than anyone I knew. Some people talk support. Marcus just stands where a fortified wall ought to be. The rabbi tried to press on, his voice lifting above the murmur, but Serafina was staging a different service, the kind where humiliation is passed like a silver platter of stale canapes. "We haven't heard the will," I told her, my voice level, focusing the sheer force of my anger into the precise shape of a simple sentence. "What's to hear?" Her smile didn't touch the hard, avaricious glint in her eyes. "I'm his wife." The smooth mechanism lowered the casket into the vault. The sound carved me up in neat, geometrical slices that only a father would recognize. When the last machinery whirred to silence, the rain finally decided to arrive, needles pricking through my expensive Italian suit jacket, as if the burden of this whole fight didn't already do the job. Serafina's dry, dismissive laugh carried across the cemetery like it had tickets. She gathered a ring of witnesses, an accountant, a gallery owner, Mrs. Whitaker, people who'd watched Julian build his $40 million firm from a single cramped office to the glass tower it was now. She fed them a line about practical and immediate matters, and everyone acted like they didn't hear the word practical used as a cudgel. Marcus leaned in. "You want to leave, Elias?" "No," I said, focusing on a single drop of rain on the quartz. "I want to remember my boy a minute." I laid one perfect, white gardenia on the tomb, the same kind his mother used to love. Then I walked toward my town car. Serafina intercepted me like the county line, flanked by that little jury she'd convened. "The reality," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial velvet, "is that Julian left everything to me. The estate, the controlling interest in the fund, the investments, all of it. Every last cent of the $40 million. "We'll see," I said, because sometimes the only courage left is keeping your voice precisely level as the world explodes. She invited everyone to her home for a proper memorial. No one looked at me when they said they'd be there. Grief makes folks easy to herd. The 20-minute drive to the Avenue of Sycamores felt like driving directly into a tempest. Other town cars funneled into the circular drive, gravel crunching under tires. Serafina already stood on the steps, energized, those heels now a drum roll. Inside, tables wore imported linens that had been ordered after Julian was in the hospital. The baccarat crystal that used to live in a locked cabinet, and flower arrangements dressed like a victorious homecoming. You don't pull that off between a graveside amen and a garage door opening. She'd planned her part down to the last champagne flute. People found places in the modern, minimalist living room Julian had loved for its views. The imported leather chair he'd fought his last months in, the panoramic window seat where we'd watched the city lights come on. We pretended we understood. The lawyer, Mr. Avery, arrived with a vintage leather briefcase that looked like it had its own mortgage, and the house grew quiet the way air does before lightning. He read the words that make a will official: sound mind, revocations, appointments. He named small gifts that proved my son remembered people who had been there before the money. A 6-month severance package for the long-time cleaning crew, a diamond pendant for a childhood friend, a significant donation to the Julian Thorne Memorial Technology Center. Serafina drummed her perfectly manicured nails when generosity wasn't aimed in her direction. To my beloved wife, Serafina Vale, Mr. Avery read, his voice clear and formal. I leave the family estate on the Avenue of Sycamores with its contents and the sum of $40 million from my investment accounts. She rose like a cork in a shaken bottle, saying, I knew Julian took care of me. Neighbors nodded because that's what neighbors do when manners tie their hands. I could hear the expensive hardwood floorboards creak under her triumphant step. I asked the question you ask when pride is a luxury and truth is overdue. And what do I receive? Mr. Avery's eyes met mine with a look I couldn't place. It was part apology and part a revelation waiting its turn. To my father, Elias Thorne, he continued, I leave personal mementos, family photographs, and his professional-grade tools from the workshop. You can't see a man who built an empire shrink from across a room, but you can hear a woman's smile stretch into an audible sneer. So Julian always said he'd take care of those he loved most. Serafina told the room, performing hostess and widow and winner without smudging her perfect makeup. Glasses clinked. Wines were compared. It might have passed for a party if not for the knowledge of the vault dirt still under my own shoes. Last in line to offer me pity, Mr. Avery leaned close. There is one additional clause, he said, almost casual, requiring private discussion. He packed his papers slowly, like a man making certain each page knew its place in the world. Serafina was too busy holding court, describing her plans to redesign the house with a more open concept and discussing her new venture, to notice anything that wasn't a mirror. I saw the flash of the anger I was suppressing reflected in the glass. The crowd migrated to the gourmet food, like schools of fish following a new current. She made a toast to a life well lived and a lifestyle well funded. When Mrs. Whitaker coughed into her napkin at the mention of the open concept destruction of a century-old design feature, I felt the first thread of my immense patience finally snap. People peeled away sooner than planned, as if their coats had grown weights in the pockets. By 8 p.m., the living room was a museum of abandoned glasses. The front door closed on the last sympathizer, and the house exhaled. Serafina kicked off her heels and looked at me the way a general looks at a small, conquered fortress. Now, she said, her voice soft with triumph. We can discuss your situation. We discussed, if you can call it that. Her voice stayed smooth, but the edges could cut diamond. Take your clothes, your medications. Nothing else belongs to you. She called me a charity case with the same mouth she just used to sip vintage Bordeaux. She told me to be gone by morning. I rose slowly because my pride, battered but not broken, wanted its say. As you wish, I told her, and something in my calm confused her. People who like to crush prefer a pathetic, creaking sound of defeat. Upstairs, I put shirts and socks and the antique pocket watch my father left me into two high-end battered leather suitcases that had known both honeymoons and hostile depositions. I put Julian's school photo between clean shirts so the frame wouldn't crack. And when I came down, she was still pacing out her new $40 million world on the hardwood. You'll try nothing clever, she warned. At my age, I said, looking her straight in the eye. Clever is remembering why I walked into a room. I left at 6:00 the next morning with the sun cracking peach on the horizon and trucks whispering west down Highway 47. The roadside inn smelled like old cigarettes trying to quit. I set my suitcases on the bedspread that felt like it could file my fingernails and made motel coffee that tasted like it remembered being water once. Then I found Mr. Avery's card. He answered his own phone, a surprising sign of a man who takes his calls seriously. Avery, it's Elias Thorne, I said. You hinted at a clause. He went quiet long enough for me to think of every mistake I'd made in 58 years. When he spoke again, a quiet relief rode shotgun in his voice. Yes, I did. 10:00 a.m. Bring what she said to you last night. Every word you can remember. It'll be a full tank, I said, and surprised myself by feeling the first flicker of forgiveness for Julian's perceived thoughtlessness, replaced by the suspicion of his genius. Riverbend's main street is brick and stubborn about it. Avery's office sits above a classic men's tailor shop, where they still do repairs for folks who believe in quality. He had Julian's portrait on the wall, the Entrepreneur of the Year photo, the kind of photo where the eyes are tired, but the mouth still promises a vision. Avery touched the heavy safe, spun numbers like someone playing a hymn by memory, and set a manila folder on the desk with 2 hands. People heard what they wanted to hear, he said, but the most important words were easy to miss. Show me. He guided my finger to a paragraph midway down a page that looked like every other page. Legal words are a crop field at night. You need a lantern to tell one row from the next. Read it, he said. The house and monetary assets transfer to my wife, Serafina Vale. I read, my mouth dry. On the condition that she provides proper care and dignified housing for my father, Elias Thorne, until his natural death. The next sentence landed like the first heavy winter snow. Should this condition be violated through eviction, verbal abuse, or failure to provide respectful treatment, the entire inheritance shall immediately revert to the Julian Thorne Philanthropic Foundation. I sat back. The expensive leather chair did the thinking for me until my own mind could join in. I told him what she'd said. Her words about trash heaps and charity, the deadline, the door. Then, as of last night, Avery said, tapping the clause with his pen, she has nothing. I didn't cry. Not there. Not in front of the wall where my son's official smile pretended it could carry the weight to home. But I did put both hands around that folder, like it was a complex contract I had just won. Julian had fought for me from a hospital bed, while monitors beeped and strangers adjusted his blanket. He'd thought ahead to a morning where I'd wake up in a motel that smelled like failure and cheap coffee. By 3 p.m., We were parking in the circular drive. The house looked the same and nothing like itself. I stood slightly behind Avery as he rang the bell. Heels clicked toward us. Those metronome heels. "I told you never to come back," she said when she saw me. "Ma'am," Avery said, polite as a judge. "See, we need to discuss your husband's will. That was yesterday. Everything's settled. You're trespassing." Avery extended the full copy. Raised seals, witness signatures, the stubborn permanence of ink. She scanned the first page with the bored confidence of a person who assumes ink only writes love letters to them. Page 2. Her mouth shaped the first vowel of trouble. Page 3. The color left her face like the tide. "This is fake," she said, louder than necessary. "It's originals in my safe." Avery said, "You may view it in my office. This copy is notarized." She read the phrase about proper care out loud as if sounding it might make it different. When Avery explained that eviction and verbal abuse triggered forfeiture, she tried on 5 expressions in 3 seconds, none of which fit. "I didn't mean it," she stammered, now reaching for desperate excuses. People say things in anger. "The document doesn't concern itself with intent," Avery said, his voice hard. "Only conduct." I eased into Julian's leather chair. I'd avoided it since the funeral. The cushion still shaped like endurance. "We'll need to discuss living arrangements," I said. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice small, a first attempt at honesty. "The Julian Thorne Philanthropic Foundation assumes ownership by week's end. I have lifetime residency rights here. You can stay if you like." I let that hang. Under some basic rules: respect, no more talk of charity cases, treat this as a home instead of a stage. Avery cleared his throat. "A modest stipend will keep the home functioning for its residents. That's in the transfer packet." "I lost everything," she whispered, a woman one step from a mirror that refuses to cooperate. "I had everything I planned." "You lost what didn't belong to you," I said. That surprised me with how gentle it came out, the anger now displaced by a fierce pity and a profound sense of atonement. There's a difference between a dream and a debt. Avery packed his briefcase with the precision of a man who knows where sharp edges live. At the door, he gripped my hand. "Your son would be proud, Elias." He chose his words well. When he left, the house quieted into its old heartbeat. The tall grandfather clock in the hall, the radiant floor heating murmuring about December, even though it was only spring. Serafina sat, hands folded in a way that might pass for prayer if you didn't know the backstory. "I'm sorry," she said. The words came like someone trying on a jacket off the clearance rack. About what I said, about everything. "Sorry is a start," I said. "Forgiveness is the road, but respect is the speed limit." We didn't talk about opening walls or modernizing anything. The house had made it a century without gratitude. It could make another with a little. I stood and touched Julian's photo on the mantel. His formal one, the award-winning year. Not the third-grade grin that lived in my suitcase. My son had been exhausted and brilliant, and in the end, careful with the old man he used to climb like a tree. By sundown, I'd brought my suitcases home. I set them by the foot of the stairs and found the gourmet kitchen the way my hands remembered it. I put a kettle on because that's what you do when storms pass. You make something warm out of water and time. Outside, a wind leaned on the porch swing. Somewhere in town, a boy I love, Caleb, fell asleep in a house I don't trust, told to be tough by a man who wears cruelty like a uniform. Today, I kept my promise to Julian. I kept a roof and a room and the dignity to stand under both. Tomorrow I'd start keeping the rest. Winter took the town by the shoulders and gave it a slow, cold turn. The oaks along the avenue of sycamores hung up their red flags and let go. Frost glazed the black iron railings in the mornings like someone had been there in the night with a clear paintbrush. I added a second blanket to the recliner and a thicker coat to the hook by the door. The way old houses and old men prepare. Layers placed where the hands remember. I kept my routines. Coffee in the dark. A pan sizzling 2 eggs that behaved themselves. A walk through rooms I knew by the sound my feet made on their floors. The foundation's caretaker came by twice a month now, serious and kind, to check the complex climate control system and the roofline, and to make sure the old man with lifetime rights still had heat in his radiators and decency in his rooms. Serafina kept to the far side of the house as if it were an ocean, passing me in the hall with careful weather in her face. She had started rinsing the fine china dishes before placing them in the washer, a small repentance performed in porcelain and running water. On Wednesdays, I parked 2 blocks from Maple Elementary and joined the line of mothers, fathers, grandparents, and people who looked like they borrowed a child once a week and were worried they'd be asked to show a receipt. The first time I saw Caleb shoulder through the doors with the other third graders, his hat was too thin for November, and his jacket was the kind of windbreaker you wear to a summer baseball game if you don't like baseball. He walked like you do when you've learned to be small. "Champ," I said, and the word got out of me before I could stop it. He blinked, then gave me a smile that hit me like sunshine thrown from a pocket mirror. "Granddad," he said. He tasted the word to make sure it hadn't gone bad in storage. We developed a ritual fast because winter rewards people who don't waste time. I'd hand him a paper cup of gourmet cocoa from the bistro on the corner, still hot enough to be interesting. He'd tell me one thing about advanced science class and one thing about recess. I'd pretend to be shocked by both. Then halfway down the block, the gray pickup would nose out from a side street and park at the fire hydrant, because rules are for other people. Derek Shaw wore a beard like a warning and a jacket with the logo of a gym where men grunt at mirrors. He smiled when he had an audience and forgot how when he didn't. He'd roll down the passenger window so the town could hear him being reasonable. "Caleb," he'd call, friendly as a cop in a commercial. "Let's go, bud. Homework first." The first time he clocked me, he gave me a grin you could put around a threat and tie shut. "Afternoon, sir," he said at a volume designed for witnesses. "We appreciate the attention. It's cold." "He needs a real coat," I said. "Teaches grit," Derek said, maintaining his performance. "We believe in discipline. We like a team that had won something." Caleb slipped into the truck with the careful speed of a boy who can count to consequences. He lifted the cocoa in a small salute before tucking it between his knees. Derek gave me a nod he'd seen on television and pulled away slow enough to suggest magnanimity. I bought a coat the next day. Dark blue, down-filled, the kind of zipper you can work with gloves on. Good boots, too, with treads that could grab a sidewalk trying to give you bad advice. I wrote Caleb's name on the tag in small, stubborn letters. I brought them to the school with a receipt in my pocket and a reason ready for anyone who demanded one. The secretary at Maple was the kind of woman who could run a county from her desk with 3 sticky notes and a glance. She read the card I'd brought for Caleb from Granddad and the signatures at the end of the power of pickup form Avery had prepared, then looked at me over the rims of glasses that made poor planning confess its crimes. "You're not on the after-school list," she said. "So working on it. I'll put him in lost and found for now," she said. "Kids find things faster when they need them." He wore the coat the next Wednesday. Derek didn't make a scene about it. He nodded at the yardage, calculated his flag, and decided to throw it later. 2 weeks into the cold, Caleb came out with his hat off, hair damp, cheeks raw with the kind of wind that gets under a child's vocabulary and steals words like fine. He smiled anyway, because children are brave for reasons they shouldn't have to be. Science fact? I asked. Science fact? I asked. Caleb looked up, his face still red from the wind, his eyes shining with the excitement of a mind that hasn't learned to fear the truth. The wind is just air that knows where it's going. Recess. Dodgeball, he said. Coach says it builds character. How many character points did you earn? 3. He looked pleased. Then his eyes flicked back toward the school doors. We have to hurry. We hurried. The gray pickup appeared, its window down, its smile set at a courtroom level. All presentation, no authenticity. Hey there, Elias, Derek Shaw said to me, having decided my name was whatever he wanted it to be. It's Elias Thorne, I corrected, a cold wave of anger hitting me. To respect your elders is something we work on, he told the town through me, his voice carrying. Right, Caleb? Right, Caleb whispered to his knees, his entire posture tightening. I'll need to talk to you, I said to Derek, stepping closer, keeping my voice soft, dangerous. About some marks I saw last week. He laughed. It sounded like an expensive tool dropped from the top of a skyscraper. Boy's rough house. He fell. Should children fall? I said, my controlled rage turning to steel. Adults are supposed to be something softer than the floor. He leaned across the seat and gave me the slow squint that men like him use when they want to test a fence. You're on my property again, old man. We had that talk with Officer Jennings last month. We're on Maple Avenue, I said. Belongs to the town. Same principle, he insisted. He flicked his fingers toward Caleb. Seatbelt. Caleb clicked the belt with careful, practiced accuracy. Derek drove off with the slow, triumphant dignity of a parade car. That night, I wrote, time of pickup, temperature, who stood where, what was said, and what was not said. I learned a long time ago that grief fades, but records keep their shape. Mr. Avery read my meticulous notes with a lawyer's concentration and a human being's sigh. We can file for grandparents' visitation formally, he said. We can also request a welfare check if a mandatory reporter corroborates. Teacher, nurse, pediatrician? I asked. School nurse is best, he said. Or a pediatrician, someone with the vocabulary for evidence. Marcus drove me to the nurse's office 2 days later because he said he didn't like the way I was white-knuckling the wheel lately. Maple's nurse, Miss Patel, had the efficient kindness of someone who spends all day triaging what childhood throws at people. Splinters, stomach aches, the occasional catastrophe disguised as clumsiness. She couldn't say much, not without the right court paper, but she could say a little. I can't discuss a student, she said, her eyes kind, but firm. But I can accept a donation of winter supplies and hand them out as needed. I can also give a general talk to the third graders about warmth, and if I happen to notice someone whose coat is thinner than my patient's, I can send a note home. Gentle is the first tool we try. Too gentle, Marcus said when we were back in the town car. You ever notice it takes more strength than loud? I nodded. Winter scuffed its feet along the curb and prepared to come in whether it was asked or not. The first skirmish came on a Sunday, the way trouble often shows up when you're tired and properly dressed for an afternoon meeting. I was on the terrace mending a glove with a needle that kept reminding my fingers what they weren't anymore. when Derek parked his gray pickup half on the foundation's property grass. He got out holding the coat and the boots like trophies wrested from an opposing team. "We have a policy," he announced, and a neighbor's curtain lifted just enough to admit curiosity. "Earning extras." "Warmth is not an extra," I said, suppressing the urge to shout and focusing on the quiet, devastating power of truth. "It is when you get discipline," he smiled. "Consequences fix that." I set the glove on my knee. "I wore a thin jacket to a spelling test once," I told him. "Came home with a fever and a D- essay about a goose named Go. Didn't improve my spelling, just improved my cough." He came up one step, then another. "People like Derek believe stairs are there to be taken." "You're interfering," he said, the performance cracking to reveal pure resentment. "You undermined me with that school." "I bought a coat," I said. "You showed him I'm not enough." "He's 8, I said. "The weather is 21 degrees. He held out the boots. "These go when he earns them, and he will because I'm not raising a soft boy." "You're not raising him," I said, gentler than the words deserved, but with the chilling authority of an old CEO giving a final warning. "You're practicing on him." That earned me a smile he'd been waiting to use. He took his phone from his pocket and dialed without looking. "Yes," he said into the air. "Officer Jennings, I'm at the old Thorne place. The grandfather is being difficult." He glanced at my face for the headline that would most damage me. "Aggressive." The cruiser took 8 minutes because the officer finished his donut and because Riverbend doesn't believe in hurrying more than once a week. Jennings stepped out with his notebook open, a reluctant referee. "Mr. Shaw," he said. "Mr. Thorne." He wrote our names carefully so he could spell them later. "Problem?" "No problem," I said. "A disagreement about boots." "Discipline," Derek said. "He undermines it." Jennings looked at the boots, then at my hands, then at the street where everyone had managed not to stare. "Civil matter," he said, which in this county is code for "I'm not getting in the middle unless someone bleeds." He shifted his weight. "But I'd encourage everyone to consider the temperature. It's only going to get colder." He coughed. "Ma'am," he added, surprised to see Serafina in the doorway, her arms folded in a picture that suggested she was choosing a side and had brought witnesses. "Officer," she said, and her voice did not have the glass in it anymore. It was flat, sober. "Would you like some coffee to go?" He hesitated. "That would be fine." She handed him a travel cup and, while Derek admired himself in the reflection of my porch light, passed me a folded envelope. I recognized the stationery, Avery and Fielding at the top in letters that knew their place. "Mr. Avery brought it this morning," she murmured as she went by. "Emergency petition." Derek saw the paper and bristled. "Lawyers now over boots? Over patterns?" I said. Jennings cleared his throat. "I'm going to suggest," he said, "that everyone stop talking on porches in public about private matters that have children in the middle." He looked at Derek. "Don't block hydrants." He looked at me. "Don't escalate." He looked at the sky. "Bundle up." They left. Serafina stood in the doorway for a moment like a cat deciding whether to come in. "You want stew tonight?" she asked. "It's the kind that forgives bad days." I nodded, the word forgives hanging heavy in the air. "Thank you." "This is not the life I thought I was buying," she said, and it was the first time she'd said a sentence with herself at the beginning that didn't end at herself. But it might be the one I needed. The petition Mr. Avery filed did what paper can do when it stands up straight. It got us a hearing date with a judge who believed in punctuality and winter gear. It gave me temporary visitation every Wednesday and Saturday. Pick up allowed by any responsible adult whose name appeared on a very specific list. It warned Derek by implication, and then by explicit language, that discipline and harm live in different counties. In the meantime, I worked my plan like a man shoveling his sidewalk before dawn. I talked to the librarian about a chess club that met after school and happened by great coincidence to meet on Wednesdays. I showed up at the dentist with a check from the foundation marked anonymous and a quiet question about affordable cleanings for kids who flinched. I asked Miss Patel if she could teach a short lesson on frostbite and what fingers look like before they're in danger. I enlisted Marcus to fix the back security fence at Caleb's mother's place so the dog couldn't run into traffic and the boy could at least play fetch without crossing the property line. None of it was dramatic. Drama burns fast and leaves smoke. Winter likes steady heat. On the first Saturday of visitation, Caleb wore the coat and the boots without comment. He got in my town car like it was a lifeboat and stared out at the town like he had signed up for a new class and wasn't sure about the teacher. I took him to the upscale bistro and ordered pancakes shaped like animals that barely qualified. He made a giraffe out of syrup and geometry. Science fact? I asked. Snowflakes are like fingerprints, he said. No two are the same. Recess. High dodgeball got canceled, he said. Coach said too many kids forgot their hats. We went to the park and built a fort out of shipping boxes I'd saved, the way old men save things that might be needed someday. We read a library book under a cashmere blanket in the back seat when the wind got rude. We practiced saying no in the way Miss Patel had taught. Calm, deliberate, loud enough to wake a sleepy adult. We practiced asking for help like it wasn't a sin. When I brought him back, Derek stood on the porch with the smile turned off. He did not comment on the hat, which had ear flaps you could land a plane on. He did not comment on the boots, which had seen more joy in one day than some boots get in a decade. He said, "Homework," and Caleb whispered, "Yes, sir," and the door closed on the boy's small wave in a rectangle of warm light. Back home, I wrote again. Time, temperature, who said what? I added one more line I hadn't known to write in my younger years. How the boy's shoulders looked when he wasn't being watched. Outside, the wind practiced for January. Inside, the house held its heat without bragging. The stew was forgiving as promised. Serafina ate at the kitchen table with her hair pulled back like she used to do when she thought no one was watching her clean. And Marcus dropped by with a bag of industrial-grade rock salt and a weather report written in a security analyst's code. "We're not done," Mr. Cole, Avery said on the phone that night, voice slow and exact. "But your plan is working." "It's winter," I said. "We move one shovel width at a time." He exhaled. "Next week," he said, "we'll argue about supervision and discipline. I'll ask questions he doesn't want on the record. You bring your notes, bring your patience." I set the phone back in its cradle and looked at the coat on the hook by the door, the boots lined up like faithful dogs. I thought of my son Julian writing clauses with his hands shaking and a machine counting his breaths. I thought of a boy sleeping under a roof that didn't yet understand its job. Tomorrow we'd add one more layer, then another, and another until the cold had to look somewhere else for a victim. By the third week of freezing rain, winter had switched from a mood to a policy. The town wore salt stains like it had been crying and didn't have sleeves. I kept my notes dry in a plastic sleeve and my temper under a wool cap. Evidence hunting sounds predatory until you realize it's mostly patience with a pen. I added columns to my log. Temperature from the bank sign. Time of pickup. Who stood where, what was said, what wasn't, and whether Caleb's shoulders were held up by hope or habit. I taped in a photo from the sidewalk. Derek's gray truck squatting on a fire hydrant, and a printed weather sheet from the library computer for the day. He tried to mail the boots back to February. Miss Patel, all quiet competence and a drawer full of Band-Aids, called Mr. Avery with language that has weight in courtrooms. Pattern, she said. Bruising consistent with grip. Child hesitant to explain. Parent figure minimizes. She wrote what she could, in a way that didn't ring an alarm so loud it would scare the boy more than the weather already did. Mandatory reporters don't shout. They arrange facts into staircases and invite the law to climb. At the bistro, the waitresses began to send out a second cocoa for that science kid without being asked. No charge because Riverbend has never met a child it wasn't willing to fatten for winter. At the library, Ms. Alvarez reserved a corner table for the chess club on Wednesdays and invented a rule that you couldn't play without a hat. On Saturdays, Marcus drove us to a low-key surplus store on the edge of town, where the best tactical gear is always in the unmarked bins, because professionals don't admit they need help until March. Serafina surprised me by learning when not to talk. She packed a small brown bag on visitation days, orange slices, a gourmet granola bar, a napkin with a joke written in neat, unconfident block letters. She set it by the door without comment, the way you set down a brick in a wall and trust gravity to do the polite thing. Derek escalated like a man walking down a staircase he insisted was up. He filed a complaint through his lawyer, a man with teeth like a picket fence, claiming interference with parental authority and alienation of affection. He brought up my age as if birthdays were misdemeanors. He CC'd Officer Jennings on an email full of words that sound brave when typed. Boundaries, consequences, masculine duty. He switched from the fire hydrant to the legal curb, but idled where he could be seen, his voice pitched for a jury that existed mostly in his own imagination. Mr. Avery read the complaint and set it on my polished dining table the way some men set a fish they intend to clean. We answer, he said. We don't bark. He coached me on being boring. Boring plays well with judges in winter. No porch confrontations, he said. No speeches, no commentary. Offer the cocoa. Say, see you Saturday. Take notes. Let him be the interesting one. So I did. When Derek tried out a new script, real men don't need other men to tell them how to raise boys. I let the line slip past like a cheap lure. When he tested my name again, Max, I answered Elias without emphasis. When he flicked the brim of Caleb's hat and called it soft, I said, it's warm, and folded another page into the log. The pressure we applied was the sort that leaves no bruise. The coach got a friendly call from Ms. Alvarez about winter activities that build lungs instead of limps. The principal received a letter on foundation letterhead, anonymous, courteous, legally bland, offering funds for a warmth shelf in the front office, spare hats, gloves, socks. The city sent Derek a photo radar ticket for rolling a stop sign 2 blocks from Maple. Not my doing, but it encouraged him to remember that rules are a community sport. Then the first real cold snap fell out of the sky and shattered across the county. The kind of night pipes remember for years, the kind of dawn that makes breath look like something you could trip over. On Wednesday, Caleb came out of the school with his backpack zipped all the way for once and his hat pulled down like a promise. He hugged the cocoa with 2 hands. Science fact? I asked, breath fogging between us. Cold air is denser, he said. It squeezes sound and makes it travel farther. Recess. Indoor. We did math and push-ups. I'm better at math. We made it to the town car just as the gray pickup took its place on the legal curb. The lip of the grill curled like it had frostbite. Derek honked once, soft, the way a man taps a dog bowl to remind it where dinner is kept. "See you Saturday," I said to Caleb, and he nodded with those careful eyes that count adults the way hikers count rations. Derek didn't speak to me. He shut the door, checked the mirror to make sure I knew he was checking the mirror, and drove off without grandstanding. It put a splinter of worry under my tongue. Men like him don't go quiet. They reload. The splinter worked its way into Thursday. Mr. Avery found the source of the reload. He came by that evening with snow in his eyebrows and the kind of smile lawyers wear when they've found a trap door and can't tell whether it opens on a staircase or a pit. "I wanted to see your face when I said this out loud," he said, hanging his coat on the hook as if he needed his arms free for the conversation. "Derek's lawyer is being paid by a non-profit called Citizens for Household Order. Sounds like a committee that tells the salt where to land," I observed. "It's a shell," Mr. Avery confirmed. "Mailing address is a P.O. box. The board is 3 names you'd only recognize if you've memorized campaign finance reports. The money comes from a donor-advised fund administered by the county foundation." "Whose fund?" I said, already feeling the floor develop a list beneath my feet. He set a single printed page on the table. Donors, percentages, transactions, black ink, marching like soldiers. One line was highlighted: Fielding Family Charitable Fund. Operating grant to Citizens for Household Order. "Your partner," I stated. "It's my partner," he confirmed. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat like a man accepting a verdict. He is not representing Derek. He's not even necessarily aware where the money landed after it left his fund. That's the story he'll stick to. But he signed the quarterly dispersals. It's plausible deniability with a monogram. The house seemed to lean in to hear my response. The clock ticked louder, or maybe the quiet did. "Conflict?" I asked. "Not by the narrowest letter," he said, "but by the spirit that keeps me from tasting copper when I shave in the morning. Yes." I confronted him. He gave me the kind of look people buy when they hire a publicist. He said fathers and fairness and trends and optics. I said child. He said calm down. I said a word I won't repeat in your kitchen. "What does it mean for us?" "It means Derek isn't paying his own freight," Mr. Avery said. "He won't tire out. He'll file motions because someone will refill his quiver. It means my name on your filing sits next to a firm name that shows up on the other side's receipts. It means I'm quitting." The word landed hard and then made a sound like release. "You can't just—" "I can," he said. "I did. I handed over my keys this afternoon. My cases come with me or they don't. Yours does because there's nothing in this county I'd rather do than win for your grandson and spite 2 cowards with 1 argument. You don't have to make yourself homeless over my fight," I insisted, the guilt of my former anger at Julian for his will now turning to a profound sense of responsibility for the man in front of me. "I have a house," he said, and he smiled for real, years falling off his face like snow off a porch roof. "And I have a new letterhead at the print shop. Avery Legal. No ampersand. I'll miss the parking space." I poured coffee. He took it like medicine and set the cup exactly on the ring the last cup had left on the wood. "Midpoint," he said after a sip, a word he used when telling stories about trials. "This is where the other side reveals its sponsor, and we decide whether we're brave or dramatic." "We're too old for dramatic," I said. "Speak for yourself," Serafina murmured from the doorway. She had mastered arriving without rustling the air. "I can do dramatic with a hair tie." She listened as Mr. Avery summarized. She nodded slowly, a woman who had learned in one hard month how money moves at night. "Nah, if it helps," she said, the beginnings of atonement clear in her voice. "I can testify to the way Derek speaks at the door and the way Caleb watches him like he's trying to anticipate weather. I can talk about what a home should feel like. I am familiar with what happens when it feels like a stage." "It helps," Mr. Avery said simply. That night, the house slept poorly. Wind bullied the gutters. Pipes shivered and then forgave. At 2:00 a.m., I sat at the kitchen table with my log and drew lines from names to motives the way men draw plays on napkins in bars. Fielding's fund fed the shell. The shell fed the lawyer. The lawyer fed Derek. Derek fed himself on words like discipline and order, while the boy tried not to make a sound as small as the one between breaths. We adjusted our plan. Mr. Avery filed a motion to compel Derek's side to disclose funding sources and communications with Citizens for Household Order. Not because the judge would necessarily swat at the money, but because sunlight can make certain insects choose other kitchens. He also filed a bar grievance against Fielding, not calculated to win, but designed to create paperwork. Fielding would have to answer with his own hands. He sent polite, pointed letters to the school about pickup protocols, reminding them that consistency protects children and adults both. He requested a guardian ad litem, a person whose only job is to speak for the child in the middle while the adults collide with their own reflections. I made lists of people who could say small, true things. Ms. Alvarez about hats and chess and the way Caleb's hands stopped shaking when the room was warm. Marcus about the day the boy laughed so hard at a pancake giraffe he forgot to apologize. Officer Jennings about curb, hydrant, tone. Miss Patel about patterns and careful notes and the difference between a stumble and a shove. Derek countered by arriving with a clipboard and a witness of his own. A man from his gym who wore sleeves like a dare. They took photos. Me handing cocoa, me walking beside Caleb, me opening the car door with care, and tried to frame them as a conspiracy to invent weakness. Their report used words like coddling, the kind of word you choose when you've forgotten that most of childhood is spent trying to convince adults you're not a vase. Let them. The judge we drew, Hollis, winter-born and famously allergic to theatrics, does not believe in adjectives when nouns will do. The week before the hearing, the cold broke the way a fever does. Suddenly, and with relief, and the suspicion it might come back meaner. Melt hissed in gutters. Kids ran without hats as if they had been paroled. Caleb and I used our Saturday hours at the park, which smelled of wet bark and new plans. We built a bridge out of fallen branches over a puddle that thought very highly of itself. "Science fact?" I asked. "Bridges are strong because triangles are strong," he said, his chin set like an engineer's. "Recess. We played tag. He said I was it. And Derek says, if you're it, you make sure you tag everyone because winners win. What do you think?" I asked. He looked at the puddle and then at me. "I think some people need a turn to rest," he said. And then he ran across the bridge we'd built and didn't fall. On the way back, we passed the gym where Derek performs his version of improvement. A banner hung over the door. Fathers for Fairness Community Event Tuesday. The logo from Citizens for Household Order sat in the corner like a sponsor who didn't want to be recognized. And did. I took a photo from the sidewalk, framed wide so no one could pretend I was doing anything but minding my own business with a camera pointed outward. "Triangulation," Mr. Chul Avery said when I showed him the banner. "Gym, shell, fund. We won't argue conspiracy. We'll argue incentive. Men who are paid to win rarely notice when the prize is smaller than the child who pays it." Fielding tried one last thing before the hearing. He sent Mr. Avery, a letter on old letterhead, the ampersand suddenly heavy. It was all shoulder pats and weather and a suggestion that Avery Legal might find January a hard month for clients. He included a check that would have covered printing costs for 2 cases and a winter coat for a man who'd lost his partner and the willingness to be surprised by him. Mr. Avery mailed the check back with a note that said only, "I own a coat." The night before court, Serafina made soup that was all root and garlic and a stubborn belief in spring. She set 3 bowls on the table and lit a candle, not because we are romantic people, but because sometimes it helps to win one small, beautiful thing on purpose. "We're ready," Mr. So, Avery said, his spoon poised like an oath. "We're layered," I said. "Coat, hat, notes, witnesses. Even my nerves are wearing wool." Serafina smiled, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled. A woman who had finally learned that the smallest rooms of a house do the largest work. "Then go to bed," she said, the quiet forgiveness I had earned from her hanging in the air. "Tomorrow, you'll need your legs under you." I did, but before I slept, I went to the mantel and touched the photograph of my son that looks more like him the longer I live. "We're at the halfway point. Julian," I told the room. "You found your claws. We found our shovel. We're still here." Outside, the thaw ticked in the downspouts. Inside, the house held the heat on a setting I wish I'd discovered when I was a younger man. Enough. The thaw that had made gutters sing all afternoon forgot its manners by night. The wind came back with teeth, and the temperature fell the way a trapdoor does, swift, final, leaving you listening for the thud you hope won't come. I'd laid out my clothes for court, jacket brushed, shoes persuaded, notes squared into a folder thick enough to be taken seriously. Serafina had put a thermos by the front door like a superstition that works whether you believe in it or not. Mr. Avery had called at 9, alarm set, tie chosen, arguments loaded, and I'd answered with the kind of controlled confidence old men fake on purpose. At 1:17 a.m., the phone rang the way bad news does. 2 short taps, a longer one that didn't know whether to stop. I grabbed it on the second ring. "Granddad," a small voice said, whispering so the dark wouldn't hear. "I'm cold." "Where are you, champ?" "Porch," he said. "He says I have to learn consequences without my coat." "How long?" "I don't know." "Minutes," he said, honest as frost. "A lot." I was pulling on my boots before he finished. "Stay on the line," I said. "Keep talking." "Science fact," he whispered. I hit me. "Shivering is your body trying to start a fire." His teeth clicked hard enough to edit the sentence. "Mine's bad at it." I left the phone on speaker on the counter and jammed it between a stack of mail and a salt shaker so Serafina could hear him breathe. She was already tying her hair back, already shrugging into a coat. "I sekiko keys," she said, tossing mine to me. "Thermos, call 911, I told her, then Jennings. She dialed while I drove. The town had turned to glass. Streetlights wore halos too bright for a reasonable hour. The world looked like something you'd put in a snow globe and shake to see whether the flakes still worked. Derek's house squatted at the end of a block that pretended to mind its own business. His truck was gone. The porch light was on. A small shape curled on the top step, knees up, hands trapped in armpits the way children's hands do when they've run out of options. I parked with 2 wheels on the lawn because grass has small feelings, and asphalt doesn't. "Caleb," I said soft, and set my coat over him before I lifted him. "Juice," he said into the collar. "Spilled it. Consequences." "I used to spill half the kitchen making coffee," I told him, and felt heat start leaping from me into him. a trade I would have made even if the exchange rate was terrible. I still do. He was awake and answering, which put us in the right chapter. I didn't check for anything dramatic. I did the simple, stubborn things you do when cold tries to make decisions you should be making yourself. I put him in the passenger seat. I turned the heater on the kind of low that doesn't brag. I wrapped him in a wool blanket that lives behind my seat because I believe in premeditated kindness. I held the thermos under his nose so the steam could explain its value before the cocoa did. Serafina's voice came tiny through the phone when I picked it up off the counter at home in my imagination, and then remembered I'd left it in the kitchen. She pulled up behind me in her sedan, tires complaining. "Ambulance is stuck behind a plow," she said, her breath turning into cloud. "Jennings is at a wreck on County 12. He says, 'Do what you need.' He'll write it up." "I copy," I said. 2 syllables I hadn't needed since the army, suddenly useful. Caleb sipped and winced and sipped again. Color considered coming back to his face and decided to try for a little while. "Can we go to your house?" he asked. "We're going to stop where they have clipboards," I said. "Yeah," he murmured. "People with clipboards know how to write things down so adults remember them later." We drove to the urgent care that keeps winter hours because winter insists. A nurse at the desk took one look, unlocked a room with the kind of speed that keeps stories from getting worse, and tucked him under heated blankets that hummed and forgave. She asked simple questions. He gave simple answers. She wrote a few of them down. Mandatory is a word that sits heavy in a pocket. She carried it like someone who had sewn the pocket herself. Serafina signed forms with a last name that had cost her a different kind of night once. I called Mr. Avery from the hallway, where vending machines offer food, but mostly sell patience. "Exigent circumstances," he said, awake in one ring. "Say the words out loud to the nurse. Ask her to note outdoor exposure. Ask if Jennings can meet you there to document. I'll call the on-call magistrate and knock on a judge's door if I have to." "Door's going to be mad at you," I said. "It can file a complaint," he said, and hung up to go make Salt move uphill. Jennings arrived first, his coat half-zipped, eyes tired enough to confess but not apologize. He looked at the chart, at the small boy asleep in a bed that had figured out how to be warm on short notice, at my hands still shaking on a delay. "Exigent circumstances," I said, obedient. "Outdoor exposure. Porch." He nodded once, the way cops do when something is exactly, unbearably clear. "You entered to prevent harm," he said, already writing. "You transported to care. You notified. The adult who did the locking was absent." "He left for the gym," I stated, the anger now a cold, hard stone of fact. Caleb murmured without opening his eyes, honest in the way children are when sleep plays defense for them. He said I could knock when I understood things. Jennings made a sound I imagine he makes when he stubs his soul. He wrote that down too. Derek arrived late and loud, his gym bag thudding against the counter like a piece of fresh meat negotiating with gravity. He started with theater, jurisdiction, overreach, grandfatherly interference, then moved into a register that made the nurse step back and made Serafina step forward. "Mr. Shaw," she said, her voice flat enough to slide under a closed door. "There are sleeping patients." He turned toward her with the reflex of a man who has never understood that other people have their own weather. "You don't get a say," he snapped. "You're the one living in a house paid for by—" "Stop," Jennings said, his pen still moving. The word landed like a hand on a chest. "You will be quiet now." Derek laughed, because some men don't know how to obey a one-syllable order unless it comes from a mirror. "Am I under arrest?" he asked, triumphant as a kid who's memorized one magic trick. "Not yet," Jennings said. "But I am issuing a temporary no-contact order pending a hearing at 9 Jabudro a.m. You will not approach the child or these adults until a judge tells you where your orbit is. If you violate that, you will see the back seat of my cruiser before your brain catches up. On whose authority?" "On mine," Jennings said, and showed it to him. Derek deflated in jerks like a tire that hasn't made peace with the nail yet. He muttered something about lawyers that I hope his lawyer never hears. He left the way he does everything, performatively. The nurse looked at me, then at the boy, then at the clock that had decided to be helpful. "He can go home with you," she said. "Paperwork says a safe adult with court time in the morning gets first possession. We call that common sense in this building." She wrote one more note gently but clearly, then tore off a copy and handed it to me. This page will matter. Back at the house, everything we'd set out for morning looked like a plan for a different life. I put Caleb in the recliner with a blanket that had never worked so hard for so many years. He sighed the way children do when they finally get to relax against something that won't ask them to explain. "Science fact," he murmured, more habit than request. "Blankets trap air," I said. "Air is lazy. It doesn't like to leave once you convince it to stay." He smiled without opening his eyes. Serafina tucked the napkin she'd written a joke on into the pocket of his coat. He'd find it later and act like it had grown there on purpose. Marcus showed up with rock salt because that's his love language, and stood guard at the window with the stillness of a man who has watched more than one winter try to get away with something. Mr. Avery arrived at dawn with a folder so thick it could brace a table. His tie was straight, his hair was not. Magistrate signed a temporary order at 4:06, he said, sliding the page onto my kitchen table, the wood taking the weight with an approving creak. "Custody with you pending today's hearing. No contact from Mr. Shaw. School notified. Nurse notified. Principal notified. Judge Hollis has read the overnight report and the nurse's notes. The lines," he added with a tired man's small satisfaction, "are redrawn." Caleb woke up with the slow blink of boys who were cold last night and aren't now. "Do we still have court?" he asked, his voice small, but sitting up straighter than it had in months. "Yes," Mr. Noah Avery said. "And we will be on time, and we will be boring, and we will win the kind of wind that looks like paperwork, but feels like spring." Caleb nodded like a new soldier taking orders he understands. "Can I bring my hat?" "You can bring two," Serafina said, handing him the one with ear flaps and the one she'd knitted badly and loved well. I walked through the rooms one more time to make sure the house remembered its job. Heat on, kettle ready, thermos rinsed, notes in the folder under my arm. I stopped at the mantel and touched my son's photograph. "We changed the night," I told him. "Now we'll change the morning." Outside, the world pretended it hadn't tried to kill us 6 hours ago. Sun made a show of landing on ice like a generous friend. The porch steps creaked in a key I could hum. Marcus locked the door behind us. Marcus, a man who understands that leaving safely is part of arriving well, locked the door behind us, ensuring the house was left in the careful hands of the heat and the plumbing that had survived the night. We got in the town car. Caleb sat between my notes and Serafina's thermos, his new hat pulled down, his eyes forward, a small soldier on a long-anticipated mission. Mr. Avery followed in his sedan with a new letterhead on the passenger seat, like a silent, trustworthy passenger. The fresh Avery legal, a clean declaration of intent. Officer Jennings idled at the curb and gave us a nod so small it could fit in a pocket, a discreet acknowledgement of a civic duty fulfilled, and a quiet hope for the morning's outcome. On the corner, The dog at Caleb's mother's place wagged its tail as if someone had finally explained the plot. A small, hopeful flicker in a world that had been too grim for too long. We drove to the courthouse as the day pulled itself up to its full height, threatening to be bright and cold simultaneously. Next came the room with the flags and the seal and the man in the robe, Judge Hollis, who doesn't love drama and does love nouns and facts. We were ready. We were layered, coat, hat, notes, witnesses, and this time, when Winter tried the door, it found it locked from the inside. Courtrooms have their own unique, chilling weather. Ours was brisk and fluorescent with a draft that came from someplace no architect would admit existed, a coldness that seeped from years of human conflict. The flags stood to attention without moving, and the seal on the wall watched without blinking. Judge Hollis entered like a January morning, on time and not interested in your opinion about mornings. We sat where our lives had placed us. Mr. Calwell, Avery, and I at the petitioner's table. Seraphina a silent arrow in the back row, her hands folded into a deep, surprising patience I hadn't seen in her for decades. Caleb with a guardian ad litem named Ms. Rowan, who wore practical, sensible shoes and a face that looked like it had been practicing fairness for a very long time. Officer Jennings near the back with his notebook, Miss Patel and Ms. Alvarez on a bench that seemed to apologize for its own creaking wood. Derek and his lawyer arrived with a briefcase and an attitude that both squeaked. The lawyer, with teeth like a picket fence, adjusted his tie like it had just been cross-examined. Derek kept his beard at parade rest, attempting a dignity that had abandoned him hours ago. Judge Hollis took inventory of the room with a single glance that made adjectives sit down. "Morning," he said, his voice dry and authoritative. "We'll be brief and thorough. Counsel, I appreciate advocacy. I do not appreciate theater. If you brought adjectives, leave them under your chair." Mr. Avery rose, his new role as Avery Legal already settling over him like a well-cut suit. "Good morning, Your Honor." "Proceed." He began with the kind of boring we'd practiced until it shined. "Petitioner seeks a protective order and temporary custody. Grounds include a documented incident of overnight outdoor exposure, a pattern of punitive deprivation of winter clothing, and corroborated bruising consistent with grip. We'll call 4 witnesses. We'll submit a log of interactions, school notes, and the urgent care record." He set the folder on the lectern like an honest mechanic lays out parts. Nothing flashy. Everything essential. Picket fence smoothed his papers as if friction were a legal tactic. Respondent will show that the child is healthy, that discipline was proportionate, and that petitioner is engaged in a campaign of alienation funded by... Hollis held up a single, silencing finger. "Nouns, counselor, not motives. We'll get to your proof." Mr. Avery called me first, because judges trust the person who starts by owning the small facts. I told the story without embroidery. Times, dates, temperatures from the bank sign. What was said and what was not said. How Miss Patel wrote what she wrote. How Jennings did what he did. How Caleb's hat had ear flaps you could land a plane on. I kept my voice level because winter rewards people who don't waste heat. "Mr. Thorne," Mr. Avery asked, "how old are you?" 71. "Any limitations on your ability to care for an 8-year-old? "I do not sprint," I said, a deliberate moment of humor in the stark room. "But I can cook, mend, wake up at odd hours, keep records, and keep a house warm. I also own a town car that starts in weather it doesn't respect." A whisper of something like a smile passed across Hollis's mouth and kept going. Picket fence approached with a legal pad full of adjectives he was trying desperately to wring into nouns. "Mr. Thorne, is it true that you recently leveraged a will clause to force your daughter-in-law out of an inheritance? Mr. Avery rose instantly. Relevance, Your Honor. Hollis didn't bother to look up. Sustained. Try again. Picket fence tried smug. Is it true you bought the child a coat without consulting Mr. Shaw? Yes, I said. Why? Because it was cold, I answered simply. He did not like that answer, which told me it had been the right one. Do you believe in discipline, Mr. Thorne? I believe in discipline that teaches, I said, and in houses that protect. Do you consider Mr. Shaw's methods abusive? I consider leaving a child outside at 1:00 in the morning in freezing temperatures to be harm. He opened his mouth to argue with the clock and the thermometer at the same time, and then decided to save the energy for someone dumber. Miss Patel came next, her hospital badge a small noun that had learned to be decisive. She spoke softly, but every word landed with the weight of undisputed fact. I am a nurse at Maple Elementary. I observed patterned bruising consistent with grip. The child was hesitant to explain, which is itself a data point. I documented and reported per statute. She did not look at Derek. Mandatory doesn't require eye contact. Cross? Hollis asked. Picket fence lifted his chin. Nurse Patel, isn't it true that boys roughhouse? Boys do, she said, her voice clear. Bruises tell us where the floor was and whether someone was the floor. Ms. Alvarez followed, library calm and winter competent. The child shakes less when he's warm, she said. He reads longer when he isn't watching the door. We started a hat rule in chess club because it allowed me to hand him a hat without making a speech. Alienation, picket fence tried. Literacy, she said, the quiet, final answer of a person who deals with knowledge, not manipulation. Jennings came to the stand like a man checking a lock he had already tested twice. He read from his notes as if they were a map. Call at 1:20 a.m. Responded to urgent care at 1:55. Nurse's notes indicate outdoor exposure. Child reported consequences for spilled juice. Porch light was on. Respondent arrived after. I issued a temporary no-contact order pending hearing. Why? Mr. Avery asked. Because the temperature was 16 degrees, he said, his eyes meeting Hollis's. Because the child's hands were cold enough to concern the nurse. Because the respondent's explanation suggested a pattern. Because I like to see children alive at 9:00 a.m. The guardian ad litem, Ms. Rowan, made juries out of us without asking. I met with the child privately, she said, professional and measured. He is bright. He monitors adult weather. He understands the rules of 2 houses and is confused about which one keeps him warm. His stated preference was, "Can I not be cold at night?" She paused just long enough to let that sentence take its coat off, revealing the raw fear beneath. I recommend temporary custody with Mr. Thorne. I recommend professionally supervised visitation for Mr. Shaw. I recommend any maternal time occur in a residence not shared with Mr. Shaw until such time as a safety plan is verifiably in place. Picket fence adjusted his tie into a new shape called indignation. Your Honor, before the defense calls our witnesses, we must note a troubling pattern. Donations to the school and letters to the city from Set. Hollis cut him off. Terse. You'll get your turn. He put Derek on the stand because he couldn't help himself. Some stories only he can tell badly. Derek sat like a man sitting on his own reputation. Too rigid. Too rehearsed. Mr. Shaw, picket fence said, describe your discipline philosophy. Men learn by doing hard things, Derek said, looking at the ceiling as if God were hiring. Boys become men by being held to standards. In our house, warmth is earned. Is it earned at 1:00 a.m.? Mr. Avery asked, mild as January light. Derek squared his shoulders. He spilled juice on the couch after a warning. After 2, he gets coddled too much with cocoa and coats. He has to learn consequences. Is the porch locked from the inside? Mr. Avery asked, his voice still low. Yes. How tall is he, Mr. Shaw? 3rd grade. How tall is the doorknob? High enough. High enough to keep him outside until you came home from the gym. Picket fence sputtered. Objection! Argumentative! Sustained as to tone, Hollis said. But answer the question, Mr. Shaw. Derek looked at the air like it had promised him something. He could have knocked when he was ready to apologize. "That, Your Honor," Mr. Avery said, the moment of truth. "I move to admit Exhibit 4, urgent care records stating outdoor exposure. Exhibit 5, Officer Jennings's report. Exhibit 6, photographs of the porch and interior lock at respondent's residence. Exhibit 7, my own sworn statement on the lock's height." Admitted, Hollis said, the sound firm. Mr. Avery stepped closer, his voice down to thread thickness, dangerous in its quiet precision. "Mr. Shaw, who paid your lawyer?" "Friends." "Which friends?" "A group, Fathers for Fairness." "Who funds Fathers for Fairness?" "Citizens for Household Order." "And who funds them?" "This is a witch hunt!" Derek exploded, the theatrical mask shattering completely. Hollis lifted a hand, cold and final. "Answer." Derek's jaw moved like a machine that had found a loose bolt. "A foundation. I don't know which one." "Would it surprise you?" Mr. Avery said, letting the words hang in the air like smoke. "If the same foundation that paid your counsel also paid my former partner's charitable fund, which then routed money through the shell that put your lawyer in this room?" Picket fence half rose. "Relevance." Hollis tipped his head. His eyes narrowed. "Counselor, stay in the lane." "I'm in it, Your Honor," Mr. Avery said, still soft, still relentless. "Motive and incentive, not to dirty the air, but to clarify the pressure on this child. When adults are being paid to win, they often forget what the prize is." Hollis looked at Derek the way a man looks at a fence and decides whether to climb it or tear it down. "Mr. Shaw," he said, his voice quiet, deadly, "do you understand the difference between discipline and harm?" Derek tried for righteous indignation. "Fathers today are under attack." "Do you," Hollis said again, not louder, just closer, his focus absolute, "understand the difference between discipline and harm? Silence isn't empty, it's an X-ray, and we watched the answer form and fail." "I was harmed as a kid," Derek said finally, flinging the words like rocks with his eyes closed, revealing the pathetic, circular logic of his cruelty. "And I'm fine." "Ms." Rowan wrote something without looking down. Miss Patel's mouth pressed into the shape of a prayer she would never admit to. Seraphina's hand found the edge of the bench and held on, a sudden, silent witness to a truth she hadn't wanted to believe. "All right," Hollis said, and the room exhaled because decisions were arriving. "Closing?" he asked. Picket fence stood, straightened papers that were already straight, and tried nouns. "My client believes in standards. He loves the child. He made a mistake. There is no lasting injury. The grandfather is elderly and attempting to replace a parent. We ask for a warning, not a wall. Mr. Avery did not stand on tiptoe or raise his voice. We are not here to outlaw winter. We are here to decide whether a porch at 1:00 in the morning is an acceptable classroom. The child asked for one thing, not to be cold at night. The law exists for exactly that kind of sentence. Hollis nodded once, as if he had just found his own words in someone else's mouth. He looked at Caleb, who sat small and very straight between the flags of two tables. "Young man," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "do you understand what we're doing here?" Caleb swallowed, his hat a small fortress on his head. "You're deciding where I sleep and what I get to wear and how cold it is," he said, his voice a thread of pure truth. Hollis folded his hands, the weight of his robe suddenly immense. "All right." He spoke orders like a craftsman speaks measurements, each word a legal boundary. "Temporary custody to Mr. Thorne. Supervised visitation for Mr. Shaw at the Family Resource Center, 2 hours weekly, to be increased or decreased at the discretion of the supervisor. No corporal punishment, no punitive deprivation of clothing, food, or shelter. Mother may exercise unsupervised time at any residence not shared with Mr. Shaw. If co-resident, visits shall be supervised at the center. Guardian ad litem to continue. School pickup restricted to adults on the list. Curbside protocols to be followed." He turned a page, then added without looking up, cementing the moral foundation of the order. "Respondent to complete a parenting course approved by the court with a specific module on trauma-informed discipline. Review in 60 days. And for the record, winter gear is not a privilege. It is a responsibility." Derek started to rise into a speech, indignation burning in his eyes. Hollis lifted one eyebrow and the wind left the room. Picket fence, defeated, tugged him down by his sleeve. "Anything further?" Hollis asked. Mr. Avery stood. "2 small items, Your Honor. First, we ask that the court note the urgent care record and Officer Jennings's report as findings of fact. Second, we request that the respondent be admonished regarding contact at school, on porches, and in driveways." "So noted," Hollis said. "Admonished," he added to Derek, as if the word itself should be written on his palm. The gavel was a single, dry sound. The weather in the room changed instantly. People who had been holding their breath accidentally took new ones. Ms. Rowan knelt to Caleb's height. "You did well," she said. "No extra sugar. Your job now is to be 8. He nodded as if someone had just handed him a strange but promising assignment. In the corridor, Jennings shook Mr. Avery's hand, then mine. "Boring one," he said, approvingly. "My favorite kind of victory." Miss Patel squeezed Serafina's forearm with the precise pressure you use to stop bleeding and start belief. Ms. Alvarez pressed a library bookmark into Caleb's hand that said, "Readers wear hats." Derek stalked past, stopped, and turned back like a man misreading a map. He looked at me as if he had a question that had never made sense, even when he'd practiced it in his mirror. "You made me look like a monster." He spat, the words heavy with self-pity. "I didn't make you leave him on a porch," I said, my voice quiet but unshakable, the final truth. "But you can decide what you do next." For a half-second, I saw a boy in his face, the raw, hurt logic of a past trauma. Then the man put the mask back on. He walked away with his lawyer talking to him in low, urgent nouns. We took the long way out. The courthouse steps had learned over the years how to hold families that had just been rearranged. Sun found the handrails and made them warm where our palms landed. Caleb leaned into my side the way boys do when they forget to pretend. "Science fact?" he asked, his voice softer, because habit is how we build bridges. Courtrooms are colder in the morning, I said, but they warm up if you keep your coat on and tell the truth. He smiled, then looked serious. Where do I sleep? At our house, I said, the promise a solid, structural reality. In the room with the window that faces the maple. We'll put the hat on the bedpost so you can find it in the dark. He considered that like an engineer considers load. Serafina exhaled a breath I hadn't noticed she'd been storing. Stew tonight, she said, because there are sentences that fix a day better than any court order. Mr. Avery lagged behind at the top of the steps. I waited for him. Thank you, I said. 2 words that are too small and exactly right. He looked at the square of sky framed by the courthouse facade and smiled without showing his teeth. We're not done, he said. 60 days, parenting class, safety plans. Paper doesn't hold by itself. People do. Then we'll hold, I said. Back home, the house greeted us like it had been studying. Heat in the registers, the kettle already thinking about boiling. Marcus had shoveled the walk in a way that looked like a man making art with a practical goal. On the kitchen table, Serafina had set 3 bowls and 1 extra because she believes in visitors, repentance, and leftovers. Caleb stood in the doorway of the spare room, which wasn't spare anymore. The quilt was the one Julian's mother had pieced, when her hands still believed in small squares making a larger picture. The window looked at the maple whose branches had learned to frame seasons without choosing favorites. Science fact? He asked softly, standing on the threshold of safety like a scientist looking at a new element. Beds, remember, I said. They keep the shape of the last good sleep and hand it back if you ask politely. He nodded. Can we read? We can, I said, and we did, under a quilt that felt like someone else's courage properly inherited. That night, after stew and a note from Ms. Rowan about next steps, and a phone call from Miss Patel reminding us to hydrate, as if she could dispatch warmth through copper, I stood by the mantel and touched my son's photograph. We didn't win everything, I told him, the truth an anchor, but we won enough to start over. Outside, Winter paced on the porch and checked the locks. Inside, the house held the line. The crisis had blown through. The boy slept, and morning, for once, could be trusted to arrive without a fight. Spring didn't arrive so much as admit it had been waiting in the wings. Snow withdrew into the shade like a shy guest. Gutters stopped speaking in code. The maple outside Caleb's window invented green 1 leaf at a time. Our routines loosened their scarves but kept their purpose. Mornings were easier now. Caleb woke in a room that knew his name, his hat on the bedpost because habits protect better than locks. We ate the kind of breakfasts that leave syrup maps on plates. He packed a lunch with Serafina's jokes folded small. Her block letters had softened into a hand that could risk a curve. On Wednesdays, we still did cocoa at the corner, but now he walked out of Maple Elementary with a stride that suggested the air belonged to him, too. The 60-day review came on a Thursday with rain that couldn't make up its mind. Judge Hollis read Ms. Rowan's report and made small changes the way a careful man trims a board. Custody with me continued. Supervised hours for Derek increased by 1, contingent on a supervisor's notes. Mother's time was clarified. Unsupervised at her sister's apartment, where the dog naps like an usher, and supervised if Mr. Shaw is present. He ordered proof that the parenting class had been completed, and not for the first time said out loud where nouns live. No cold as a lesson. Derek arrived in a clean shirt that didn't know who owned it yet. He said very little. At the center, behind glass designed to help everyone breathe, He learned to bring snacks without speeches. The first time he apologized for being late. He did it like someone reading a line. The third time he did it like a man who had practiced in the car and wanted to try it for real. I did not clap. I did not sneer. I signed my name at the desk and left my notes in my pocket. Measured mercy can still be measured. At home, the house kept choosing us back. Serafina painted the spare room's trim the color of a warm almond and learned to knit hats that were proud of their mistakes. She started volunteering at the Family Resource Center on Tuesdays. Front desk, no fanfare, and learned everyone's coffee order by week 3. One evening, she stood in the doorway with a grocery sack and said, not quite looking at me, "I'm going to try my own place for a while." It wasn't exile. It was an adult choosing a door, a decision made in daylight, with no histrionics. We carried her boxes out together. She hugged Caleb, whispered something about pizza Fridays, and left a casserole so precisely labeled it felt like an apology that had learned to do dishes. Marcus went on mending things nobody would pay him to. A fence latch at Caleb's mother's place, a loose board on the library ramp, a rumor on a porch that needed a new hinge. Officer Jennings turned up less and waved more. Ms. Alvarez's chess club doubled. Hats optional now, though a basket by the door remained full because Riverbend likes to be ready for the next cold snap. Miss Patel added a bulletin board near the nurse's office. How to be warm without asking. The school called it a pilot. The kids called it the treasure wall. Mr. Avery's new letterhead had learned to look like it had always existed. Avery Legal fit on one door and into one calendar, somehow expanding to hold what mattered. He asked me to stop by the print shop one afternoon and showed me a trifold brochure with a photo of a coat rack on the front. Warm Hands Fund. It said, a partnership between the Thorne Foundation, Maple Elementary, and the Riverbend Library. Small grants for boots, coats, mittens, space heaters, checked by someone who knows how to keep houses from becoming news. He'd written it in lawyer, then translated it into human. You'll chair it, he said. I'll sit where the chairs are, I said. But I can write a thank you note and order mittens by the gross. We put the rack in the library lobby because that's where dignity goes to read. A small sign said, take what fits. Another said, leave what no longer does. People obeyed like it was a law they were happy someone finally passed. By April, every child I knew had 2 hats, one for their head and one for lending. On Saturdays, Caleb and I built things that didn't have to pass inspection. Bridges out of sticks, boats out of bark, a kite that thought it was a comedian. He still asked for a science fact because repetition is a child's way of stapling the world to itself. He started bringing me his own. Science fact, he'd say, serious as a judge. A scar is skin that remembered where the edges were and decided to keep going anyway. Good one, I'd answer, and mean it. We saw Derek at visits through glass, and then later across a small table in a room painted the same neutral optimism as every clinic. He tried. Sometimes he failed where no one could see but the supervisor's pen. Sometimes he caught himself halfway to a mistake and backed out of it like you do from a parking spot you chose too fast. Once he brought a book with dog-eared pages and read without coaching. Caleb laughed at a joke right on time, and the laugh did not ask permission. At the 90-day mark, Hollis kept the frame and loosened a screw. One additional supervised hour to be earned by a week of simple notes marked no concerns. He looked at Derek the way a man looks at whether you can work around the clouds if you're honest about where they are. You will not be graded on volume, he said. Only on warmth and patience. We kept living. That turned out to be the bravest decision available. By June, the maple slapped shade onto the porch as if it had invented generosity. Caleb ran sprinklers in a hat on purpose just to laugh at the contradiction. On a hot afternoon that felt like the kind of reward winter offers if you file your paperwork, we held a small gathering at the library to thank people who pretend they don't need thanks. Ms. Alvarez made a speech only a librarian could make, all about circulation, how warmth and books share a secret. When you give them away, they return in better condition. Miss Patel stood in the back and tilted her head so the applause could reach the part of her that saves her strength for weekdays. Mr. Fiume Avery handed me a clipboard with numbers that behaved themselves. The Warm Hands Fund had purchased 117 pairs of gloves, 63 hats, 42 coats, and 1 electric bill. That would have been a story if it hadn't been a receipt. The foundation account balanced like a kitchen chair. Caleb tugged my sleeve. "Granddad, hit me. Science fact. Maple seeds are called samaras, and they spin so they can land somewhere better." We watched a handful helicopter down like little decisions. "Seems right," I said. That night, I sat with the photograph of my son in a house that had learned against its will, and then on purpose, how to be kind. "We did what you wanted," I told Julian. "We kept a roof. We kept a boy warm. We turned the money you earned while you were running out of breath into something that lets other people breathe." The porch creaked in a familiar key. The house held the cool like it had trained for it. In the next room, Caleb's breathing settled into the rhythm I measure my days by now. I closed my eyes and counted the ways winter had failed to win. Measured mercy isn't a parade. It's a schedule. We keep it. We show up. We add a layer when the wind changes. And when a child asks, "Where do I sleep?" we answer with a room that knows him and a hat on the bedpost, just in case he wakes to a night that needs reminding who it answers to. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.